To follow on from Kevin, I think it's a real good opportunity to highlight again the only way to tackle this issue is through partnership working and having an approach with business, the regulator, the third sector, and everybody to bring this together. For those of you who don't know much about the GLA, we were created on the back of the Morecambe Bay disaster. And Morecambe Bay was probably the most easily identified form of modern slavery that we've had over recent years. Now, 2004, 23 Chinese cockle pickers died in Morecambe Bay, and that was down simply to the greed of those individuals that brought them into the UK and controlled them and put them to work. The experience of the GLA since then in the regulation of the agricultural sector, particularly the supply of labour into the agricultural sector, has given us an insight into the changing shape of the supply chain and also given us a clear view of what modern slavery actually looks like in businesses on a day-to-day basis. It is clear from our work that supply chains have been infiltrated by organised criminality for their own profit based upon the misery of the victim that is at the end of the supply chain. And whatever way we look at this issue, at the end of it there's always a victim. Now businesses have a real significant role to play in this because the victim, as it stands, will not have a voice or any opportunity to change their circumstances to bring them out of modern slavery and get a better life for themselves. So therefore, any opportunity to work with a business in the supply chain should be taken to encourage that conversation and debate around this issue. I've been with the GLA since we started in 2005, and the first thing that I learnt very quickly was that Morecambe Bay, although it would be difficult to prevent it given the circumstances, it could have been prevented by everybody speaking to each other. Particularly law enforcement agencies and the local population knew there was an issue in Morecambe Bay. There was no joined up thinking, no joined up intelligence, and nowhere to report that information to. Had we had something similar to the GLA at that time, the chances are that somewhere would have recognised what was happening, somebody would have done something about it and effected some change. But what I would say is that you within the room here and your supply chains are part of that conversation and communication that we need to have. So what does modern slavery look like in the UK? As Kevin said, workers have promised a better life, and the organised criminal groups that are behind all of this understand that businesses require workers to continue with their business. Workers are brought into the UK on the promise of a better life, managed into debt, controlled, coerced, forced, whichever word you wish to use, and put into labour supply chains. It's a very, very simple form of criminality. It's low risk, high return. The low risk comes from the fact that we really don't question where workers come from. We're really very good at questioning where the product comes from, and a lot of work's been done in the retail sector in particular around fair trade and other checks and other systems in place to identify product supply chains, but we're really poor at looking at labour supply chains. We're also identifying where workers are brought in to different sectors. So workers who've worked in the GLA sector one week, the next week they'll be working in logistics, the next week in construction, and the next week in a recycling plant. Because that worker is seen as a source of income for the person that's brought him in, they will be put to work wherever they can be put to work. And there are cases that I've managed and dealt with in the West Midlands where workers who haven't had work have been sent out to conduct metal thefts, shoplifting and begging on the street to continue that form and source of income. So those people are working in environments where we don't seek to question. We don't open our eyes and ask the question, where does our food come from? Where do our clothes come from? Who's working on that construction site? These people simply don't exist. So therefore the criminal has a very low risk of that individual escaping from that circumstance or anybody really identifying there's a problem. The criminal fraternity rely upon that anonymity within society to further their criminal enterprise. And when you talk about criminal enterprise, you should not underestimate the amount of money that can be made by businesses, and I use that word advisedly really, because this is a business model that the criminals use. It's a business to them. We had a case in Derby, workers were working across 3 different sectors I've just described. 12 to 18 workers were controlled for a period of around 3 to 4 years. The first guess at the criminal benefit was £1.3 million. The second estimate was £2 million, and we with Derbyshire Police stopped counting at that point. You don't need to control many people to make a vast amount of money out of this. And that is a trade based upon the fear and coercion that that worker feels and the lack of opportunity to escape. Working with the private sector for the regulator is key, in my view, to tackling this issue. We've got a collective responsibility to work together to tackle this. It doesn't mean the regulator does one bit and the private sector does another and the third sector does another. We've actually got to have a coordinated approach to this. We all have information that is of benefit to each other. We all have information that we can impart and use to tackle the issue. Without that communication, we're not going to make any difference to these people. Also, for businesses, you have to look at what other criminality might be in your supply chain based on the back of this criminality that is in the labour supply chain. We hear stories about thefts from sites on industrial scales from the criminal gangs that control the workers because they've gotten into the business. They come in through legitimate routes, through the recruitment agencies that need the workers. The criminal gangs will put them in the direction of the recruiter, of the agent, of the legitimate business. Now, I don't pretend for a moment this is easy to identify. Businesses can be infiltrated quite easily on the labour supply chain simply by not asking the right questions. And what we encourage businesses to do is have a robust recruitment process where you actually interview your workers. Once the workers are in place, have a robust process where you engage with those workers to identify if there are any issues that they wish to address. You will not have a worker walk into your office as a business and put their hand up and say, I'm a victim of modern slavery. They will not have the confidence to do so. They may not understand they're a victim of modern slavery. An often quoted phrase is, well, they're better here in the UK than they might be at home. That doesn't mean the exploitation is right. So therefore, these workers will be controlled to such a point where they will not say anything through fear. You need to encourage an open dialogue with your labour force and labour supply chain to understand where these workers come from. Are their expectations being met? Are they being paid? Are they being coerced? Because through that engagement, you'll build a confidence and a trust for them to come forward and identify an issue. And when you have an issue, as Kevin has identified, this is criminality. Please report it. We can tackle it together. But without reporting it and without giving these workers a voice, we're actually not going to change anything. And unless we change something, these workers will continue to be victimised, underpaid, mistreated, and all seeking a better life which you will never get. The Modern Slavery Act, I think, has been a key instrument in encouraging businesses to start this debate. People within the retail sector that I work alongside are perhaps some way advanced in this conversation. But within construction, it's really encouraging to see that businesses within this room have taken an active interest in drawing together some best practice and expertise and look towards creating a voluntary code. Now, voluntary codes work. You might think it's a strange thing for me to say as a regulator, but voluntary codes, in the absence of regulation, create that conversation and allow a structure to be in place which you can examine and test and challenge. Now, it's a tool in the box. It's not the be-all and end-all. It's not going to solve all your issues. But using a voluntary code can work to encourage that conversation. And all we would say in the GLA is be brave enough to have the conversation in an open way, because no criminal enterprise wants anybody talking about the way they conduct their criminality. So by having that debate within your business, you make it uncomfortable for the business to be infiltrated. The criminals will sit up and take notice. You may not stop it. You can deter, disrupt, and displace it. And that is a success. So we should look to every opportunity to do it. The Modern Slavery Act is the vehicle which allows that conversation to start. Please use that opportunity. And if you need the GLA to support and assist and direct anything that we can, we're very keen to do so. Thank you.